Welcome to History at the OK Corral. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a comment down below, and share this episode with a fellow history lover. And now, on to tonight's episode. West Texas, November 1855. As the cool autumn wind whips around them, a large party of Comanche men, women, and children make their way northeast through the barren country, on their way to the seasonal roaming territory of their most important source of sustenance, the huge herds of American bison, or buffalo, that roam the Great Plains. Though their austere surroundings would be enough to drive almost any mortal being to the brink of endurance, the Comanche seem wholly unbothered as they plod their way across the open prairie. One among their party, however, is visibly bedraggled by the incessant pace, an omnipresent cloud of dust stirred up by the Comanche horses and mules. He is a captive of the Comanche, taken as a human spoil of war in their ongoing conflict with the Texas Rangers and cattle ranchers who ventured out further onto the frontier with every passing year. His name is Nelson Lee. Only months prior, he had been a member of a group of enterprising horse traders who had been making the treacherous journey to Southern California to sell their vast herd of valuable horses and mules at a markedly higher price than they might garner in Texas, Louisiana, or east of the Mississippi. The party of 27 men had been set upon by the Comanche, and only Nelson Lee, William Akins, Thomas Martin, and Jonathan Stewart had managed to survive. Akins and Lee had been forced to watch as Martin and Stewart were subjected to vicious, hours-long torture killings at the hands of the Comanche. They had then been divided up amongst the war chiefs, and Lee had been designated as a slave to the renowned warrior Spotted Leopard. Lee will be relegated to the menial tasks of completing chores in camp, as well as the gory, stinking work of skinning and gutting the hulking buffalo that are harvested. His only hopes for survival are to comply with his captors in the Comanche. Though the nearly unbearable pangs of loneliness and isolation incessantly tear at his psyche, Lee's experience is not entirely unique on the Texas frontier. For decades now, across the whole of central Texas, entire families have been killed or carried off, and entire farmsteads laid waste to by Comanche raiders intent on driving out any and all intruders from their hard-won lands. This policy is not necessarily driven as much by racial motives as it is by cultural ones, as the Comanche reserve the same treatment for any and all of their enemies, be they Anglo-Texans, Tejanos, Mexicans, Americans, Spanish, or members of rival tribes like the Tonkawa, Caddo, and Cheyenne. The Comanche have risen to prominence in this harsh land after migrating southward from the northern ranges of the Rocky Mountains after acquiring the horse in the 17th century. In the ensuing time period, they had swept through the southern plains and wrested virtually the whole of Texas from the control of perhaps their most hated enemy, the Apache. Though the vast majority of their encounters on the open expanses of the frontier have gone unrecorded in the annals of Western posterity, the results of the sheer brutality of this conflict were on clear display to the Spanish friars who inhabited the Catholic mission of San Saba, near today's town of the same name. Here, the resident priests saw what amounted to veritable hordes of Apache fleeing into the confines and comparative safety of the mission walls, in search of salvation from the incessant attacks of the Comanche. The Apache, too, have unleashed countless attacks on Comanche villages, killing men, women, and children, and taking any spoils and captives that they could. This cycle of violence is also not at all unique to the southern plains, but what is about to take place will be one of the few glimpses garnered by captive sources of the brutal realities of intertribal warfare. Unbeknownst to this Comanche band now traveling through these vast expanses, a group of Apache, also out on a hunting trip in hopes of fortifying their stock of meat for the winter ahead, is in the immediate vicinity. As the Comanche band, traveling in a group spread out over roughly a quarter of a mile, makes their way through a short expanse of hills and streams that dots the otherwise flat country, both parties are woefully unaware of the other's presence. The Comanche's extended traveling line is bookended by their group of pack mules in the back and a younger group of warriors to the front who dash back and forth playfully as the rest of the party plods away. Lee and Spotted Leopard ride near the rear, near the mules. Though he is still figuratively bound in the role of a captive slave, for the first time in many weeks, Lee is able to enjoy relatively unfettered movement as his limbs are left untied in order to enable him to work. He even has some measure of assurance that, as the Comanches have not yet killed him as they had his companions, he might even be able to someday become an adopted member of the tribe, an incredibly rare circumstance for any fighting-age male prisoner. For a brief moment, Lee is able to afford himself a psychological reprieve from his current plight. Then, suddenly, the warriors near the front of the procession become visibly animated, some of them dashing back towards Spotted Leopard, and some making their way to the crest of a hill to their immediate left. The cry goes up from the young warriors at the front of the line. The Apache have been spotted, and an attack is underway. Now, there is no time to waste. The lives of every single member of this party of Comanche, including not only their prisoners, but their women and children, are now in immediate danger. The word travels to every warrior that the Apache are approaching from the opposite side of the hill to their left, and the men all now scramble to form a battle line atop the hill in order to receive the oncoming Apache charge. In his autobiography entitled 3 Years Among the Comanche, a narrative of a Texas Ranger, Nelson Lee gives his first-hand account of the beginning of the battle. The whole band dashed upon the hill, except for Spotted Leopard and myself, who remained with the mules in the rear, and on reaching the summit, deployed into the line. By this time, I heard the cry of, "The Apaches! The Apaches!" and knew at once there was hot work at hand. As yet, however, I had seen nothing of an enemy, and only drew the inference that there was one present from the cries that I had heard, and the general commotion that prevailed. In the course of 2 or 3 minutes after our line was formed on the ridge, the air was rent with the noise of the war whoop, and up the opposite ascent, at full speed, came the Apaches in a solid body like a black cloud. As they approached, a shower of arrows were discharged from both lines. Then, they rushed upon each other in a hand-to-hand encounter. A vicious fight now unfolds, as the Comanche warriors know that they are the only line of defense between the attacking Apache and their own women and children. Though firearms are certainly not uncommon amongst native frontier tribes by this time in the 1850s, they are not possessed by a great many warriors on either side in this case. Thus, the combat at hand entails up-close and personal encounters fought with spears, clubs, shields, hatchets, and knives. The bloody, violent conflict unfolds with shocking speed and intensity, with the only rules of engagement being victory by any means necessary. The cries of the vanquished and the exhortations of the victors resound about the battlefield, seeming to drown out any and all other sounds in the vicinity. Lee's personal account of the battle continues. From the position I occupied, I had a fair unobstructed view of the battle. It was fierce and terrible. The horses reared and plunged and fell upon each other, their riders dealing blow for blow, and thrust for thrust, some falling from their saddles to the ground, and others trampling madly over them. The Comanches outnumbered the enemy. Nevertheless, they were forced to retreat, falling back down the hill almost to my position. But still, they were not pursued, the Apaches appearing to be content to hold possession of the ground. Soon, the tribe of Spotted Leopard again rallied and dashed once more back into the attack. If possible, this contest was severer, as it was longer than the first. Again, the first blow was given and returned. Again, horses and men intermingled in melee, stumbled, fell, rolled upon the ground, while the wide heavens resounded with their hideous shrieks and cries. My blood thrilled through my veins as I looked upon the scene. I had mingled in encounters fierce even as that, but never before in the midst of the hottest fight was I overcome with such a sense of terror. To be an inactive spectator of a battle is far more painful than to be a participator in it. As the Apache warriors continue their onslaught, and the Comanche fight to defend their families, Lee struggles with the odd dichotomy of his situation as the lone captive observer. His account continues. I hoped devoutly during the engagement that the Comanches would be beaten, being impressed with the belief that if I should fall into the enemy's hands, my chances of escape would be increased, for I had often heard that the Apaches, though a most warlike nation, were more merciful to their prisoners than others of their race. But in this, I was disappointed. The Apaches at length gave way, disappearing beyond the ridge. Instead of pursuing their advantage, however, the Comanches hastily gathered up their dead and retreated towards the mountains we had crossed. As soon as they had left the ground, the Apaches again appeared upon the height and bore away their dead. It was a drawn battle. The Comanche have lost 17 of their own warriors in the fight, with Lee's account estimating that the Apache have likely lost approximately twice that number. The Comanche now commence with the unenviable task of burying their dead, as well as tending to their wounded. Amidst the carnage and sorrow, Lee recounts the Comanche approach to this grisly endeavor. The close of this eventful day was occupied in burying the slain, which ceremony was performed in their customary manner, except they seemed to chant the death song with more energy and feeling than on ordinary occasions. With them, death, at any time, even of the nearest and dearest of their kindred, is not regarded as an event to be deplored, but on the contrary, to be welcomed with rejoicing. But when a warrior dies on the field of battle, their joy and exultation knows no bounds, for their crude theology assures them that his departed spirit is, at once, caught up by the Great Spirit and borne to the region of everlasting and supreme felicity. After the dead are buried, the Comanches' lives and their hunt for food must continue. The band makes their way to their seasonal hunting grounds, seeing no more of the Apache along the way. Here, they will remain for 2 months, harvesting buffalo and camping on the open plains. By the next spring, a peace with the Apache will be struck. With the ever-increasing encroachment of American and Mexican settlers into their territories, the two tribes come to view a partnership affording each some form of mutual protection as a far better option to the continued intertribal slaughter. For his part, Lee will eventually escape and go on to continue his adventurous life on the Texas frontier for years to come, ultimately succumbing to an undisclosed illness in New York City on December 21, 1871. But the many tales of brutal intertribal warfare and unyielding violence between settlers and the native tribes of the American frontier, as well as the countless tales of conflict and combat from Nelson Lee's personal account of his life and times in Texas are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button below, or click the link in the description to become a member on Patreon. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.